Hello students. I encourage you to watch the video Poe's Masterpiece, The Philosophy of the Raven, on our modules under Edgar Allan Poe. If you watch that, that'll cover most of what you'll need to know about the Raven and Poe's work, The Philosophy of Composition. And there will be a handful of questions on both of those on our final exam. So that video enables me to make this lecture a little bit shorter because I can just add some things not covered in the video. First of all, and I think the video mentions this, but I wanted to add to it. If you look at the form of the poem, there's a lot of different kinds of repetition. And I think the video points out the repetitive rhyme, both end rhymes and internal rhymes. So that's one form of repetition. Of course, the most obvious repetition perhaps is the refrain, nevermore. And when you read The Philosophy of Composition, Poe explains all those choices. It's really a good window into the poem. But there's another, rhyme, the rhyme scheme, the refrain, the rhythm is also very, consistent. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary. Pretty regular rhythm. One other form of repetition that I don't think they do cover in the video is alliteration. Repetition of the same consonant sound. So, for instance, in the first line of the poem, weak and weary, those W's there. The third line, nodded, nearly napping, repeating those N's. In the 13th line, silken, sad, uncertain, rustling. And the next line, filled, fantastic, felt. Line 25, deep, darkness, doubting, dreaming, dreams, dared. Line 28, words, was, whispered, word. And then in the next stanza, line 32, soon, somewhat. Then the next line, surely, said, surely, something, lattice, see, this mystery, still, this mystery. And so that gives you the idea. If you go through the rest of the poem, there's a ton of alliteration. So why use so much repetition? What does that have to do with the meaning of the poem? Well, I think a big part of what Poe is doing here is he's using this kind of repetition, these different forms of repetition, to try to mirror the kind of obsessive compulsive mindset of the narrator. Just as the rhymes repeat, the rhythm repeats, the consonant sounds repeat. The narrator of the Raven, it keeps repeating, the same thoughts keep repeating in his head as well. In fact, if you think about it, after the first couple of questions, he asks the Raven, he knows what the answer is going to be, right? The Raven only says one word ever through the whole poem, nevermore. So he knows what the answer is going to be before he even asks the question, which brings to the logical conclusion that why does he keep asking the Raven these increasingly questions that increasingly will agitate him and break his heart and his spirit? I think it's almost like a form of self-torture. He wants to torture himself because he knows, will I ever see my beloved again? He knows the answer is going to be nevermore. So why would he ask it if it weren't some kind of masochistic, self-torture? Now, let's skip over to Poe's essay, The Philosophy of Composition. And the main thing, one of the main things I want you to know about the philosophy of composition is Poe's insistence that poets write their poems on purpose, right? Their poems are consciously constructed rather than just written accidentally through spontaneous inspiration. That's important because I'd say most people these days, if you ask them, how does art come about? How is art created? Most people would probably repeat the romantic, the romantic stereotype of artistic creation, which is, you're just kind of minding your own business, tripping through the daisies or whatnot, and zap, inspiration strikes spontaneously, and you just feverishly write it all down or paint it all on the canvas, whatever the genre is, and that's art. That's a popular notion of art, I think, because it sounds kind of mysterious and exciting. Excuse me. That's not always been the main thought people have about how art's created. Back before the Romantics, if you go back to classical artists, for instance, there was an understanding that people crafted their art consciously. It wasn't just this kind of mindless effort of just writing your emotions or whatnot. And so Poe is more in line with the classic notions of art. In fact, he says in the second paragraph, nothing is more clear than that every plot worth the name must be elaborated to its denouement before anything be attempted with the pen. So in Poe's idea, you plot out the whole story before you even start writing. Now, personally, I think he takes that a little too far. I think that in reality, I've been writing songs for a long time, and I've written some poetry and even a couple short stories, and I've read a lot of other artists, and I can at least speak for songwriting. It's really both, that you do need inspiration sometimes, or you are inspired with an idea. But I've written 250 songs or so, and I can think of maybe 2 of them that just kind of poured out of the sky seemingly, and seemed effortless to write them. The rest, the idea may be inspired, or some little piece of a melody or something like that. But to get from that to the completed song almost always takes a lot of conscious effort. So here's what Poe says about that. He says, most writers, poets in especial, prefer having it understood that they compose by a species of fine frenzy, an ecstatic intuition, and would positively shudder at letting the public take a peep behind the scenes at the elaborate and vacillating crudities of thought, at the true purpose seized only at the last moment. He goes on. It is my design to render it manifest that no one point in its composition is referable either to accident or intuition, that the work proceeded step by step to its completion with the precision and rigid consequence of a mathematical problem. So the romantic notion of art is it's spontaneous, it's, you're inspired and you don't put conscious effort into it. Poe is arguing the opposite. Now, again, maybe he takes it too far in that direction. He almost makes it sound like a paint by numbers task where he's plotted all this out in his mind. So I think he takes too much spontaneity out of the equation. And in reality, I think both the Romantics and Poe, or when they wrote their philosophy of art, they weren't being entirely accurate. But just as I think the Romantic poets realized that that they did construct consciously, they just kind of downplay that. And by the same token, perhaps Poe, had some intuition, some artistic instinct, and he just downplays that to make a point. Again, the reality is a mixture, but honestly, I think the reality is probably closer to what Poe says than what that Romantic notion is. So in this essay, Poe gives, some pretty definite observations on what he thinks the best kind of art is. He says poetry has an advantage over other genres like, longer works because, he says, it appears evident then that there is a distinct limit as regards length to all works of literary art, the limit of a single sitting. He thinks to get maximum artistic effect, the work of art needs to be consumed in one sitting, right? Not read over a period of time. And that's why he thinks, poems and short stories are superior in that regard, at least to novels or, a longer play or something like that. So it's one of his principles, to have maximum impact, a work of art should be consumed in one sitting. So it needs to, the work needs to be short enough to make to make that possible. He also says beauty is the sole legitimate province of the poem, that the goal should be beauty more so than anything else, instruction or what have you. He says the tone of the ultimate work of art is sadness. Regarding then beauty as my province, my next question referred to the tone of its highest manifestation. In all experience has shown that this tone is one of sadness. Beauty of whatever kind in its supreme development invariably excites the sensitive soul to tears. Melancholy is thus the most legitimate of all the poetical tones. Now that he agrees with the Romantics. The Romantics also thought melancholy was the most beautiful tone, if you will. And then Poe gets even more specific. He says, the depth then of a beautiful woman is unquestionably the most poetical topic in the world. The death of a beautiful woman is the most poetical topic in the world. And that sounds kind of weird. Like, what is Poe, a serial killer or something? No, I mean, he definitely had his quirks, but and maybe you could even say he was a bit pathologically, obsessed with the theme of death. But at any rate, different interpretations. But you can see how the poem "The Raven" fits all these principles. Now, it's always possible that Poe wrote "The Raven," and then he wrote this afterwards, and then just said, "Well, what's in The Raven?" And I'm going to say those are the best ways to make a poem if we're kind of cynical in how he wrote this, the essay, that is. Thought there was something else. Yeah, I guess that sums it up. Let me just look on here. Yeah, that covers it for The Raven and the philosophy of composition. There's going to be one question on Poe's other work that I put on the syllabus, the poetic principle. Gosh, I don't think I have that one here. Hold on one second. I think I have it in this book. Poetic principle. Sorry, I would have had this one ready, but I forgot about covering it. It's a shorter essay than the philosophy of composition. And of course, I don't have it marked here. Here we go. Let's see. Well, I don't want to waste any more time, but let me just say, so for all you'll need to know about the poetic principle as far as the exam You know, Poe talks about that people talk about the value of a work of art having something to do with how much effort was put into it. Now, even though Poe just showed, according to his philosophy, there is a lot of conscious effort put into a work of art, but he thinks that's not how we should judge a work of art. That if someone says, "Oh, well, I spent 3 years writing this," well, okay, that's impressive in terms of effort, but that's not how you judge a work of art. And instead, you should judge a work of art based on whether or not it, in Poe's terms, elevates the soul. Okay, that's according to Poe how you should evaluate a work of art.